And welcome, Yasmin. I see people are trickling in, so I'll just go ahead and get going. Today, we have with us Yasmin Landy. She is an institutional portfolio manager for Fidelity. Yasmin has spent most of her career dedicated to international equity investing. However, after attending a women's leadership program that encouraged all participants to make a plan to move your career towards a passion, she added the responsibility of working as the institutional portfolio manager on the Fidelity's Women's Leadership Fund. So Yasmin is a strong believer in the importance of corporate culture to the success in any organization and will share her insights and journey for us today. So with that, I'll turn it over. Welcome, Yasmin.
Great. Thank you so much, and thanks so much for inviting me to speak to you all today. I'm really looking forward to it. In terms of my background, it is true, my main focus has been in international equities. I work on funds that total about 100 billion, including, some of you may remember, the Magellan Fund. It was probably the most famous mutual fund run by Peter Lynch way back in the 70s. And then also, yes, recently joined the Women's Leadership Fund. So you'll see that I have some 20 years of investing experience in my career on my bio, and I'm really thankful for finding a career that has been exciting, fulfilling, and always challenging. But there's something that I always get asked about in my bio that I thought would be interesting to share with you. When you see my graduate degree, it says Columbia University MFA. And people always say, is that a typo? Isn't that supposed to be MBA? Well, no, actually, after an undergraduate degree in English, I attended Columbia, the master's program in fiction writing. And from there, I went on to teach English for 2 years. However, I was always interested in the world of investing, in companies and in global economies. And I sometimes joke, I was really the only person reading the Wall Street Journal in the Columbia writing program. But my studies had really pointed me in one direction. And for sure, I didn't think that I could break from it. And then a family friend who was in the investment field said, you know, go for it. You can do it. I'll never forget my first successful interview. I was able to tie why teaching English was relevant to the investment world. You know, kind of communicating difficult concepts, the patience, the diligence and preparation that you needed to succeed. And my interviewer seemed to be on board. And then he said, well, what did you do in these gaps? It was the summer gaps when you were a student. And I responded, nothing relevant to this job. And he said, well, what was it anyway? And I replied that I was a waitress during the summer. And I was completely wrong. He loved that and thought it was really relevant, and I got the job. So now when I reflect back on this patchwork of relevant or irrelevant experience, I know now that it really is all relevant, be it balancing all the elements needed to satisfy a hungry customer or keeping high school students engaged. It was really all relevant. I believe as I carry these diverse experiences, it does make me more capable in the work that I do today. But I wanted to talk to you today about my path to joining the Women's Leadership Fund, and also to tell you a little bit about the fund, if you'll indulge me. But when I was asked by ALSK Communications to come and speak, I really wanted to tell you about a personal and career journey which really started at the Women's Leadership Program at Babson College last year. So the Babson Women's Leadership Program is an executive education program that Fidelity, my firm, sent me to participate in as part of their support for female employees. This experience, while I'm sure it was really different for different people who attended, had some important takeaways for me. And I think I really wanted to share that with you because there are takeaways that I think can be replicated no matter where you are. And first and foremost, it was listen to yourself. So listen to yourself is so much easier to say than to do. First of all, who has the time to listen to themselves? I'm busy listening to my spouse, my kids, my coworkers, my boss, leaders, friends, and it gets really noisy. When I arrived at the leadership program, We were staying there on campus, away from home, away from work for a week, and we were strongly encouraged to limit contact with work. And that alone was really hard. For me, since I hadn't been in the classroom for some time, I really loved the chance to kind of gobble up all the new information. I was learning about the latest studies in groups and culture building dynamics, studies around the benefits of diversity, bringing your whole self to work, and ways to create an equitable and inclusive culture. So, social science was one of my favorite classes as an undergraduate, and many, many years ago. Specifically, I remember a course called the Sociology of Education. And I remember a study where social scientists measured the time teachers spent answering questions from male students versus female students. And regardless of the gender of the teacher, the time spent answering a boy's question was about 3 times the length of a girl's. In the same class, we read studies explaining the very early emphasis on math and engineering for boys and nurturing for girls, including toys like Legos. And I'm happy to say, for those of you who know about the Friends Legos that are pastel colored, they seem to be a favorite toy of my daughter when she was small, and she is now, quite the math student. So I don't know if it was the Legos or the colors or what, but these cues definitely do start young. And I liked studying this space because it felt really true to my own experience in life. At Babson, learning the latest on social science really awakened my old passion. It was thrilling to be learning about the prospects for change really in the world. While modernizing my knowledge was great, it wasn't the biggest learning of the week. Most importantly and most uncomfortably, I was asked to communicate with myself. Was I happy in my role? Was I fulfilled in my work? Could it be better? We had a lot of sharing time too. I kept telling everyone I love my role, but I had one professor who literally was chasing me down hallways to discuss this, and she was certain, while she knew I loved the challenge of my current job, that it wasn't everything and I should really reach for more. And actually, that professor was right. I was expanding my knowledge and the benefits of diversity and the challenges of building a truly equitable world was a passion of mine that was reawakening. And I started to realize that I was missing something in my career. About a week before attending the leadership program, a colleague and friend of mine, Nicole Connolly, had launched a new fund at Fidelity. It's called the Fidelity Women's Leadership Fund. And as I was being forced to talk to myself, sitting in a dorm room for the first time in many, many years, away from my work, away from my family, I kept coming back to that fund. I thought, how exciting. My firm was building the benefits of diversity into an investment strategy, and how exciting to be at a firm that really supports this idea. And didn't I miss being part of something that might be able to drive change through awareness, through stressing the importance of diversity and equity in a corporate culture? And while it was maybe surreal and a bit painful to talk to myself about these passions, I realized the final step of the leadership program that I would put to action. So one of the other learnings I took with me was women tend not to ask for that promotion, that new job. For whatever reason, we tend to focus more on being recognized without solicitation. But when that recognition doesn't happen, it can be frustrating. And in contrast, actually, men tend to go ahead and ask. This also seemed true, at least to me, in my own actions. Maybe it was how I was raised. Maybe I really wanted accomplishments to be acknowledged without having to self-promote. I didn't tend to be overly pushy with the next steps or promotions, but this time I decided to try something new. And the week I got back from work, I asked to join the Women's Leadership Fund as the institutional portfolio manager, and they said yes. So I accomplished my goal there. And if you'll indulge me, I would love to share a little bit about this fund, because I think you'll find it very interesting, some of the attributes of businesses that can build corporate cultures that are really strong and how well they do in terms of their stock performance as well. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see if I can actually do that. Okay. Oops. Did it work?
I just see the mostly black and the top of the PowerPoint.
Oh, really? Okay. Let's see if this works.
There it is.
Does that work?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for bearing with me. That's a little bit about my bio. Okay, so this is what I wanted to take you quickly through, and I think some of the statistics will be interesting to you. So one of the reasons we decided that we could go ahead and launch this fund there are a lot of changes afoot in the US. The demographics and what people really want to invest in is changing. The thing that's, I think, really interesting is that investing in businesses that have a lot of diversity actually seems to create better performance. And for us, we felt like we had a really unique utility because we can meet with a lot of the businesses, we can talk to them about their strategies and their culture, and we have the ability to track all of that. So here's some cool statistics, I think. So if you look at women-controlled assets right now in the US, it's 14 trillion, but it's growing at a 6% rate, and it's going to be up to 29 trillion in 2025. And when we talk to customers who are in the younger cohort, their interest in investing in gender equality is pretty high. It's 63%. And overall, it's about half. Interestingly, about 40% of the investors in this fund are men, because of course men care about these same issues too. For the world, for their daughters, for their wives, it is all something that I think a lot of people care about. So this is what I think is particularly compelling. We did an analysis and we just looked at companies that score the best on gender equality. So these are companies that have more than average senior leaders that are women. And we neutralized the sector so that you don't get a big tilt to say all the companies that are testing well are in, let's say, the technology space, which does tend to test well, and you're underweighting maybe mining or something like that. We made it all neutral, and even still, you had about 1.5% outperformance of the companies that didn't really seem to do a whole lot in gender diversity. So we thought that was a really compelling idea. So we started to screen the world of companies that you could possibly invest in, and looking at leadership criteria like they needed to have at least one leader in the C-suite female. Governance threshold, we were looking for businesses that have at least 33% of the board women, and then policies, at least 2 policies that were pro-gender diversity, things that help for retention, for recruitment, and for promotion of women. This gives you a little bit of a sense for what we're really looking at and what we've been tracking. And it's really fascinating to research companies in this way and look at how they've built policies, how they've built a new pipeline of individuals to come into their business in a more diverse way. And sometimes it starts from really even involvement in the community in a young way. Like, for example, girls who code, businesses that get involved in bringing women or girls into these predominantly male-dominated fields. And so we track all of this and score companies, and then we combine it with what's really, natural for us, the fundamental side, looking at balance sheets, looking at income statements, looking at growth potential. We combine the two of them, and together we think that that actually creates a very compelling portfolio and that could do very well for the investors. But I wanted to just leave you with this last page that I think is pretty interesting. What we're looking at here, when we build this portfolio of companies that really care about these issues, that I get very excited about that third pillar, the policies, because it goes beyond just gender equality, but more broadly looks at diversity and really harnessing it. When we look at our portfolio, if you kind of compared that to the S&P 500, just the basic, very large equity market, you'd have 140 more CEOs that are women, 100 CFOs that are women, and 140 more women on boards. And I think, at the end of the day, this is really a path. It creates a path to the future, whether it's our communication with companies that realize that we really care about these issues and we think it makes companies better, they start thinking about it themselves and the actions that they're taking with their organizations, and maybe start to do more of that as well. So in closing, and I'd love to open it up to any questions you may have, I really was excited to share all of this with you, and I hope that, you know, my small takeaways from my experience may get some of the juices flowing. But I love to continue learning, always feeding the brain, recognizing that things that you may think are not contributing to your success, irrelevant, is relevant, and you know, really just ask for what you want. I think it can sometimes really work. So I will try to end the slideshow or try to exit out of this and hopefully take questions.
Thank you. Slideshow.
Oh, it is? Okay, let me see if I can. Does that work?
Yep.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks for the quick condensed. So what I'll just questions. There's a little bit of echo. See if I can pinpoint where that's coming from. So how was it that you started working on this fund?
About a year ago now. So it's a very small fund still. We're only at 60 million, which is not too big of a surprise. I think it takes a long time to build a fund that is quite unique and niche-y, more of a thematic fund. But yeah, it's been 1 year, and so far so good.
What is one of the major things you've learned, and how to adjust where you started and how you thought you'd attack it into where you are now, and maybe you had to adjust your strategy? Or
do you mean relevant to the fund specifically, or just career things in general?
I guess just how you approach, you know, how you look at the different businesses, the indicators, aside from just gender and C-suite, that type of thing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think some of the learnings for me would be around culture and how that impacts value of a business. And, you know, you talk to some of the business leaders like Mark Benioff of Salesforce and his commitment to culture. And it's a fantastic company. But what he's realized, and I think a lot of CEOs have realized, is that if you open your pipeline and you create an environment that people want to work in, they work that much harder for the business that they're in, right?
Yeah.
And I always saw that, but I just never really quantified it. And that's been, for me, this last year, a big learning, that you can put a lot more science to something that feels, you know, it's always felt a little touchy-feely. You talk to the CFO or the CEO, and you get the sense for what they're striving for in terms of their culture. And it's not just, you know, like these employees really want to work hard, so they drive margins, they drive the top line, they do all of this, but being able to actually measure it is something that we hadn't done before. And I think that's pretty amazing. And yeah, I mean, you can really see that it does add value. And I think when you go down from the C-suite and talk to folks that are managers in these companies, you see it come through. We look at things like Glassdoor, what employees are actually saying. So sometimes you hear of a policy that's been put in place, and we verify it to see, is it working well? Sometimes you're not going to please everybody, but it takes a little bit of time for this shift to be underway. We look also at how companies are recognized in terms of, are they winning awards for being a really strong culture, place to work, for diversity and inclusion? So I do think I've seen a more systematic way of measuring it, and then having that impact actually wealth creation or value creation in the company itself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I saw Deb, you went off mute. Did you have a question?
I do. This is Deb Morse. I'm curious, as you've been picking the companies you're going to invest in, have you had an opportunity to talk to some of the women leaders, CEOs, board members? And I'm curious about stories. I mean, do you have any in particular that stand out as you've learned more about the companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the stories that stick out most to me, and there are leaders, take, for example, Accenture. You have a leader in GlaxoSmithKline, CEOs that are women. I think a lot of what strikes me is, and this is really, I mean, most of our meetings when we're talking to them, it's about their business and not, I mean, we have a portion that's going to be focused on what they're doing on policies and culture, but it's largely what they're doing in terms of their business. And what I think has been really interesting to see is that recruitment effort, and how in some areas like technology in particular, I think women leaders understand that you're really going to be limited if you don't open that pipeline. And in some cases, that means reaching out at a much younger age, or at least in the college space, where you can attract young women into those fields early on, because otherwise it's going to be really impossible to have the employees that you need. A lot of times when we talk about growth in these fast growth areas, one of the limitations is employees, and finding employees who have the skill set. And so I shouldn't say that only the female leaders of these businesses get that, but I have heard them articulate it probably a little bit more passionately and with a great understanding that there's just so much untapped talent in that space. So I think that's probably what I would share.
Thank you.
All right, we have a question from Rob Scott in the chat, and he's asking, what do you find to be the most important metrics around culture? And is there something specific you can recommend that we measure?
That's a really great question. And it's a super hard one to actually answer. But I think because we weight all these different measures, and even, can you imagine like coming up with the weightings, and maybe we'll back test it and see which one really is as we gather all of this, since we're really 2 years in on measuring all of these different attributes and assigning a weight so that we can come up with an actual number on them. We can clearly back test that to see if there are some that are a little bit better than others. But the one that, to me, looking across the globe, and we really do look in Europe, in Asia, and of course the US, which is where we predominantly invest for this strategy, I would say one of the things that I think is the biggest factor, and also one that a lot of the third-party providers that are doing ESG scoring get wrong, is transparency. So if we don't know gender pay gap metrics, as an example, or how many managers are at the manager level, how many are women or people of color, we want to know those things. And if there's no transparency, a lot of the third-party providers will fill in that blank with an average number. So you actually get benefit from not reporting it. And our view is that transparency is extremely important, because if you can't measure it, we can't analyze it, and maybe the companies won't focus on things that aren't measured. So we actually give like a 0 if it's not measured. And so that's a big difference. But so for me, I think that transparency ends up kind of trumping a lot of things. And when I go back to that weighting example of, if you're weighting a company on all these factors that I was showing you, if you get a 0, it's going to be really hard to get a good grade. And so I do think that is probably one of the most important elements for companies to share with investors, but also to kind of accurately measure themselves so they can see if they're getting better. And I turn the mirror back on my own company and Fidelity and the steps we're taking, because we're in an industry that's very male dominated, and we're not where we want to be yet. But we look at the class of recruits that are coming in, and that is our hope for the future and how diverse we can become. And so that's sort of where we're looking and being transparent with our own employees and where we're trying to get as a firm. And so I think that's probably, in my mind, one of the most important things around culture.
Yeah, hi Yasmin, this is Luann Pogue, and you mentioned the Fidelity culture, and as a investor in Fidelity's, products, I've noticed, so you have Abigail Johnson as your CEO.
Yeah.
And so how does that, do you think that makes a difference having a woman as the CEO of your company, that, there is more awareness to these issues and women in leadership roles, because, she's, running the company and it's a large company? And how does that affect, you mentioned culture just a minute ago, that you're trying to become more transparent. Do you think that's, is that internally something, it sounds like you're working on it, but if you have your leadership forum, is there any other like specifics that you do there?
Yeah, I think it really does. And when Abby Johnson came in to take over for her dad, I mean, it's sort of a new generation in a way. And obviously her father built the firm and did just an amazing job. And the growth areas that we built out, really, really wonderful, and helped build the culture at Fidelity that, as I would describe it, since I worked at other firms, coming in, I had never been in such a collegial, intellectually curious culture. So that struck me right out of the gate when I came. But what has sort of felt to me like it's shifted with Abby, and I'm not sure if it's anything to do with her gender or just who she is and her leadership style and areas that she really cares about. But we're so much more focused, both as a firm, not just in having a diverse workforce, which is really a huge emphasis for her. That's really come to the forefront, whether it's, training for us, recruiting, gender slates, so that we make sure that when we're hiring, we're looking at a diverse candidate slate. There are so many different policies we have in place for employees and recruitment. We're looking at recruiting from different schools. I think, I'm on the international team, and I am really living and breathing the benefits of it's amazing. And it's diversity in kind of a different way, because I am working with people from all over the world, and you really have to have that, I think, to figure out stocks across the globe, to work with friends, colleagues who grew up in mainland China and so on. So you really see that power. But even beyond the culture and diversity and inclusion, and having that be a very key priority for the firm, it's also looking at what can we do more in terms of the environment. Things from, solar arrays on campuses, to we're doing a lot of composting, believe it or not, on campuses too. It's pretty cool. But, a lot in that space as well. So, and then on the governance side, it's joining up with different organizations too that care about the same things. And like SASB, for example, in the ESG space. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach, and it is a very modern approach. It feels really inclusive, very energized. And yeah, I think it's just setting the firm's culture up for the next generation.
Thank you.
I have a question. This is Allison Devora. I am curious to hear internally kind of the structure of the fund? Was it something that was kind of top down? Was it a group of people who came together and decided this was something to look at? Is it a job somebody has, or kind of like a volunteer, kind of, I guess, initiative that people work on? What's kind of the structure of how you guys run this internally?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and one that's kind of near and dear to my heart, and I think actually it goes back to Luann's question too about Abby coming in, because I know from working at Fidelity for about 15 years, there were a lot of us on the investment team that were really interested in environmental, social, and governance investing. I was in the emerging markets team, and I really saw the impact that it had on businesses, whether it's how companies were treating their employees, in China or Taiwan, it just went on and on. You saw, or British Petroleum and the disaster that they had on offshore drilling. So I definitely thought this was a very powerful way to invest, and things that you should look at, but we weren't really there yet. So as a firm, there were many of us who said, hey, there's something here. This is an interesting way to look at investing, but it wasn't as mainstream. And in terms of gender investing, which I see as kind of a subset of the larger ESG, environmental, social, and governance investing style, what happened there is you had more firms starting to recognize that, and we can talk about why this is, but a lot of firms like Credit Suisse was doing work, Goldman Sachs was doing work looking at this gender lens concept of investing in companies and measuring their culture through a gender lens. Is the culture prioritizing equity and diversity, at least in one metric that is easier to measure because it is actually easier to get the data, for example. And so I think partly it came from the fact that it became more known in the industry of investing, and it became more accepted, and there were more firms studying this as, hey, this could be an interesting way to actually invest. So that's number one. But number two, I often say, we could come up with ideas that could actually be really good, but if there's no demand for them from our customers, I don't think anyone's going to have a big appetite to launch a fund on it. So we needed to really make sure that our customers were interested in this. Thematically, are they interested in the environment? And in this case of the fund, are they interested in investing in a strategy that considers female forward policies and so on? And the results were really positive. There was a lot of interest. Sometimes I get surprised because we'll do presentations before, when we were allowed to go see people in these very big settings, and inevitably there would be pushback. Why would this be a good way to invest? And we can talk about that too. But it was really the marriage of the acceptance of a gender lens investing style, along with demand from our clients, that allowed us to launch this. And that, combined with people who had really been interested in this for many years internally, being able to have the chance to build it because of those other two aspects that were critical in being able to launch the strategy. And then the other part of your question was, who's really driving this and who's doing this? We have a team of 6 analysts in the ESG team. We usually dedicate one analyst to doing a lot of the work around our gender screening, but we also try to use artificial intelligence where we can, whether it's scraping documents or websites to look for some of the statistics that we're looking for, because some of the policies, they're not going to just pop up. You have to actually do a lot of legwork to find out. And it's one of the sort of fun things to see, because I end up seeing some interesting or novel policies around whether it's, solutions for moms who are nursing and child care solutions and so on. But we're doing that sometimes manually, and sometimes we'll use artificial intelligence as best we can to make it as leverageable as we can, because we really want to expand it, not just in the US and not just select companies and international, but we'd love to screen more broadly across the landscape.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When you say demand from your clients for this, do they outright say, oh, we're looking for these types of diverse metrics, or is it kind of more of a natural progression towards different types of maybe more modern organizations versus other ones, and you can just kind of see the trend?
Yeah, so yeah, it's kind of both. It's kind of both, and we're big fans of soliciting feedback from our clients. And so, maybe there's always issues with surveys, right? Like people who want to do them have a stronger feeling, but still you're getting a really good sample size of investors. And I also think that there's a big nod towards the younger generation that care a lot about this. We see it in surveys, but we also see it anecdotally. A lot of my colleagues, they have children who are kind of just taking their first job, and they'll get their 401k plan, and they'll say, what do I have to invest in? I want to have a sustainable fund. So the younger generation is more focused on this, and we'll see if they grow up and forget it all. I don't think so, but I I have two that are in that Generation Z, and I think they care a lot about this. Is the clothing I'm wearing sustainable? Who made this? Where did it come from? So I think there's a greater awareness, and there's a greater desire to, when you have money and you're investing it, even for your retirement, you want to know what you're buying with it. It always surprises me, but even my daughter, who's 14 in her high school investment club, said, I don't think we should invest in fossil fuels. I thought, where did this come from? But the generation is a little bit different. So yeah.
My goodness, I never had a club like that at my high school. That would have been handy. Do you notice differences in different areas of the world on this topic?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there are different areas that are much more nascent, but coming along. And actually, going back to the leadership program that I did at Babson, it was so fascinating because we had about half of the students, as it were, in that group coming from Japan. And the Japanese student that were with us, and we've invested in a lot of Japanese companies, and we meet with a lot of Japanese businesses. But I'm usually meeting with the CFO or the CEO, and I'm not talking as much, other than my colleagues who are from our Tokyo office. The chance that I had in this leadership program, there were a lot of young women from Japan who were talking about really similar things, and philanthropy and equality and women increasing their leadership roles. And it's so different there, right? So I would say Japan, while it's fascinating because they need workers. And one of the best ways for them to gain workers, because they have a really stringent you really can't just immigrate to Japan. Yeah. It's really difficult to do. So one of the Abe, when he was leading the country, was to open up more and more opportunities for women. And so it was kind of like, you were twisted into it because you needed more people to work. But even still, that's a geography that I feel has so much potential, but they have a long way to go. We own Shiseido in the fund that does makeup, and that is one of the few Japanese companies that has some good female representation. So that is a geography that is probably the furthest, not the furthest behind, but further behind. Mm-hmm. Europe is really good. Europe, in metrics, even beyond gender, I think has been focused on this, and also sometimes by mandate, they need to disclose some of the numbers. So they've had to be a little bit more equitable. Even in some countries, salaries are transparent. In Sweden, you can pull up your next door neighbor's salary. It's totally out there. So you have differences like this that lead to greater transparency and maybe move the ball forward a bit more. So, you know, and I'd say the US is right in there in the middle. I mean, we have a big range in terms of businesses that are doing a great job and others that are just figuring it out. I have not met any businesses that look at you and say, you know, I completely disagree with the questions that you're asking me about, you know, do I care about my carbon footprint, or do I care about diversity of my employees? But there's a lot of learning right now, I think, and we get a lot of questions as a firm about what companies can do or what kinds of metrics we care about. So it's a pretty interesting time. It's you know, it's really fun to work in right now.
Mm-hmm. I have a question in the chat from Bianca, and her question is, are there other SMAs in the works also with a focus on encouraging diversity? If so, can you share what those are? I'm not sure what SMA is.
Well,
small.
Oh, sure, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it could be separately managed account, but so you know, we really are looking at that. And one of, you know, I was mentioning how excited I am for this, what I call the third pillar of the process, because the first pillar is just, you know, in the C-suite, then you have the board, and then the third one is policies, which I think are, you know, the future and the culture establishing, because you can have a CFO leave or a CEO leave, board demographics can change. But the third one is so fascinating, and we often get asked, you know, why not broaden that out to more measures of diversity? And I think that's absolutely right, and it's something that we're looking at. And since we're tracking it already, I think it would be really exciting to launch something in that theme as well. So that is definitely something that we're looking at. Beyond that, other themes within the environmental, social, and governance space. You know, we have things like a water fund, environmental fund. So I think we'll continue to look in that space, because investors do want to target their exposures and target what they care about. And I think those advisors in investment world too like to be able to give their clients something that could align with their interests. As long as, you know, and I do believe this, that you're not trading your return. It's not like now you'll invest in this and you'll never be able to retire because it's a terrible investment. Like, you want to marry those two things so that the investor can do well by the investment, but also feel like there's something of their whether it's their values, their ethos in their investments as well. It seems like that's something that's of greater interest for some investors today.
You mentioned that the tech industry is really interested in these types of metrics and culture. Which other industries are really kind of more on the forefront of this, and which are not?
Yeah, so I mean, I think discretionary, meaning businesses that are in retail, have always been there. You know, I think about companies that are matching their customers in their employee base. That ends up being a really clear advantage, and something that, you know, if you look in the past, you used to have companies that were selling predominantly to women, and yet the majority of their decision makers were men. That's a really bad you know, recipe for success, I would say. And so staples companies, food companies, discretionary companies have had a better profile in terms of with gender. But areas that have been harder, but not completely without options, have been in energy, mining, materials, and utilities to a degree. But the hardest one is real estate. Real estate is very male dominated, very male dominated. But even in utilities, there's a holding that we had, American Water Works, where the CEO and CFO were women. It's changing, but that's, you know, an example of one that was really very heavy on women for a utility, which it seems a little bit surprising maybe. So that's kind of how they line up in terms of different sectors and how far along they are.
Interesting. Did anyone else have a question? I'll open it up.
I'm curious whether or not there's any, I guess, different for companies to be a part of the fund than from your previous management.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I love that when we have, sometimes it's our clients, because we'll have corporate clients, of course, like you, who are on the 401k side, and they will be, you know, presenting a one of the funds that are on the lineup, and then they'll say later on, you know, that we qualify for that, the Women's Leadership Fund that you guys have. And it's absolutely one of my favorite things when companies do call that out. And same thing with company meetings where the CFO or the CEO doesn't typically mention it, but the IR often will say something about their board composition or their C-suite, that they would apply, or that they would qualify to be in the fund. And I just think that's so great when they flag it, because it feels like, you know, they care, they recognize that we care about it, and that they would like to be recognized too and end up in the fund. So that's kind of great.
And then one of my main questions, of course, is what are the impacts of this pandemic on any kind of attempts that you're making on this strategy, or in general in the ESG space?
Yeah, that's such a good point. And it was interesting because I had a page about the pandemic in my presentation that actually removed because I was worried about time. And it was highlighting that particularly for women, there seems to be a even greater weight on women during the pandemic, whether it's things like, you know, you may end up doing more of the at-home work or with your children and so on. And some of the surveys that we were seeing seem to suggest that there would be more managers, female managers, dropping out. And so we were pretty dismayed at that statistic, just because it's sort of years of more inclusion going the opposite way. In terms of the fund, I feel like we transitioned really quickly to this online world, and it's been extremely busy. So I think we're getting still a lot of traction with the fund. It is available in Canada and the US, and webinars. And I think because this is a hot topic, and maybe in some ways the pandemic, while there's concern for women's role and what kind of pressure and weight the pandemic puts on women versus men, maybe. It's not really clear yet, but I think in terms of discussing the fund, it's almost maybe more heightened, because we're doing a lot of, we're talking about it a lot. So I feel like it hasn't really you know, held us back, but I guess it's hard to say. Maybe it was even more, you know.
Yeah. I'll pause now, see if anyone else has a question, or you could put it in the chat. All right. And then do you have any insights on how you think the space will change if there's a new vaccine that comes out and, you know, the economy kind of jumpstarts again? What do you guys suspect will happen from an investment perspective?
Yeah. So I think that like this last Tuesday was really quite a trade, right? I mean, that in my mind, knowing a bit about the vaccine and how cold you have to keep it and how you the logistics of getting it to where it needs to be in order to administer it, and then also to make sure that people are okay taking it, that they're happy to do it, right? Those two things are not entirely clear yet. It's so wonderful that we have something that this Pfizer, the numbers seem so compelling, but I think getting so excited that everything's going to go back to normal and as large as it was in 2019. I personally, and I mean, this is something that we're debating internally as an investment organization, how much are you going to bring future growth forward, how quickly, and how are you going to build that into your models? What does it all mean? I think you can see how volatile this week was, and then this sort of digestion of the news of the virus. Maybe it's going to take a little bit longer. It's not going to be overnight for all of these reasons. You have to think that through. The areas that I'm kind of interested in would be what changes for good. What I mean by that is I think we all want to travel. We want to take vacations, right? Like we cannot wait to go out to restaurants and not be nervous that somebody's sitting too close to us. That's all going to come back. I have very high conviction in that. But I think there are some dynamics that will probably not change because companies have been, I think, enjoying some of the cost cuttings that you have when your T&E is just taken down a lot. Employees are not traveling as much. And so some of that will reshape how we do business. I think you're going to still want to go see your customers in person, but maybe going in between offices to see your colleagues is going to be by Zoom. So that has implications for, corporate travel, as an example. I think real estate in the corporate sector is going to change as well. We're starting to realize how efficient. I know Fidelity, the productivity numbers have been amazing. So we'll see if that means that I lose my office in downtown Boston forever. It might be something like a sharing situation. So that stuff that I think with greater certainty we can kind of see. So those are the elements pertaining to the pandemic that I think we're sorting through as investors, but areas where the market will get ahead of itself, come back, and even in and of that, there's going to be opportunities, I think.
Yeah, new opportunities that come up.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, whenever, just as an example, on Tuesday, when you looked at energy prices and energy stocks, airline stocks, when things get maybe a little bit ahead of themselves, possibly, you can trim some of your exposures down and redeploy it into things that may have sold off, because you just have this really big rotation where some of it is going to be based on readjusting your models, but some of it's also the dynamics of the market. And when you have a momentum shifts and you have some market participants that need to follow that momentum, you can have distortions. And I think active management, you can take advantage of that, hopefully, in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Luann, I think I saw you. Did you want to ask another question?
No, I think she was kind of answering. Yasmin was. It was kind of like the crystal ball. What do you see for 2021 and beyond? So you kind of were answering that as I was thinking about it. So thank you.
Yeah, fits and starts.
Have any insight into or any thoughts on, so working remote has put a lot of stress on certain people, but could it also be that more people are now able to work because they can work remote, so it opens more opportunity for those that may not have gone to work 8 to 5?
That's such a great point. And I think that's the hope when we look at those sort of depressing statistics on women in the workforce. I think you're absolutely right. If you look out a year or two, if we're able to shape a lot of the businesses to have more work from home and prove that people are really productive in that way, and just the technology and how much we've accepted it. And I mean, maybe I don't want to Zoom all day long, but now and then it's not so nice. So yes, I definitely think that is something that could be a real silver lining for women in the workforce.
Wonderful. All right. Any other last minute questions? We only got Yasmin for another 4 minutes. What are the certifications what are they specifically that you look for? You mentioned them earlier that a company gets that Fidelity is searching for.
Oh, sure.
How do you
So
get them?
yeah, how do you get them? So they're usually things like, Forbes will have best places to work. We look at all of the publications, those accolades, and that's really what we look for in part. I mentioned Glassdoor. We look at that, but you can't. I also know sometimes companies will engineer things there and really work hard at curating Glassdoor comments and ratings, and so it's helpful, but it's not the end all be all. And so we just look for it, but we don't necessarily hold it as, if you have that, that's a certification that you have an amazing corporate culture. But we really like to try and look at it a little bit, peel back the layers of the onion a little bit more. But there are those publications that some of the magazines will have.
Got it. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. This has definitely been enlightening. I hadn't really thought about this area before, so in that context of investing. So appreciate it, and I'll touch base with you after this meeting.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for everybody for calling in. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See ya.